Ahimsa is a science. Gandhi, May 6, 1939.
It's very important for people, especially in the West, to take nonviolence, ahimsa, out of the moral framework, because as morality, there really is no verification. There's no checkup. You can say it's immoral to do something. I can say it's moral, and we'd have no way of deciding. But the wonderful thing about science, as practiced in the West and in other parts of the world today, is that every proposition that's made about nature can be tested, can be verified. And that is exactly what he did with nonviolence. Obviously, he called his own autobiography The Story of My Experiments with Truth. And I think that in this respect, he was benefiting from a really ancient position that was held in Indian civilization for times immemorial, that there is no distinction between what we call religion or what we call science.
I feel like when Gandhi says ahimsa is a science, he's lifting it out of the realm of vague moral statements. For him, nonviolence was not a dream or idealistic hope. It was an observable, testable law of human life and society. Just as gravity operates whether or not we believe in it, Gandhi argues that ahimsa operates as a kind of law, a natural functioning of human society, a kind of science of the heart. And, of course, within Taoism, the Tao is usually described as the natural law that unites and underlies all phenomena. To align with the Tao is to act in harmony with reality itself. And saying that ahimsa is a science echoes this Taoist view that the value of harmony is not an opinion, it's an observable pattern. Even in Buddhism, the Dharma is called a law, a truth that is seen by the wise, not dependent upon belief. And similarly, ahimsa is that karmic law of intention and action, inevitably returning to the intender, the person who's creating that intention, but also redounding outward to the rest of the community. And so when we're talking about moving down with the flow of the river in Taoism, there is the natural movement of the universe around us. And if we can harmonize with that movement, if we can go with the flow, as we might say, then things work better. And we have to take note of that. We pay attention to what works better. And the fact is, as we've been paying attention, this quality of nonviolence, this action that arises out of unconditional love and friendliness, willingness to be compassionate and to take everybody into account, it has near magical effect of transformation. It changes how people function. It makes things work out for the better. This is an observable fact. And we want to stick with the science. We want to do the things that function the best. So as activists, as change makers, as parents and friends, we want to do the thing that we recognize works the best. And so we pay attention. We look around, we see what violence has wrought, how well the habits of vengeance protect us from the future. And then we look around and see what happens when we are willing to open our hearts and make change that way. Write it down, pay attention. There are scientists who are paying attention. Erica Chenoweth, Michael Nagler. We can learn from what they have gleaned from the data and move forward like any good scientist.
Those who are attracted to nonviolence should, according to their ability and opportunity, join the experiment. Gandhi, August 11th, 1940.
The nonviolent aspect of Gandhi's approach here was he never wanted to impress people into his movement willy-nilly. He wanted them to adopt it on their own. Even a small number of people who adopted nonviolence because they felt that it was right, that we call principled nonviolence, would be more effective than a large number of people who were just going along with it for some reason, which is, in effect, how militaries work. They don't insist that you completely subscribe to all the political positions of the army. They just insist that you get in there and do what they tell you to do. This would be an abomination in nonviolence. It cannot work that way. It has to elevate and bring out the capacity of every individual person to, as we were saying before, to learn from their own mistakes and form their own conclusions and act on them.
And this quality of the people who take part in nonviolence, who enact this law of ahimsa, these are people that, while enacting them, while doing the work of peace in the world, we are also healed. We cannot try to do good in the world while doing harm to ourselves. And so the idea of bringing people in and forcing them to do things that are against their own conscience and trying to shape them against their will to do something is the exact opposite of what we're trying to do. We have to be inclusive to everybody. And I feel so hopeful about that. At the monastery, for instance, where I live, when people are doing work, the entire place is built upon volunteer work. And everybody there that's working is doing something that they love to do. We ask people, what kind of work do you enjoy? Because when that work gets done, and there's always plenty of work to be done, but when the person loves what they're doing, the outcome is very different, both for the person doing the work, and when you look around, you can see that everything is an act of love, rather than something somebody felt forced into doing. And the difference, the result of it is incredible. It is a completely different world. And we're trying to do that also within our own activism and our own movement toward healing the world. We have to be part of that circle of healing.
I want to realize brotherhood and identify not merely with the beings called human, but I want to realize and identify with all of life, even with such beings that crawl on the earth. Gandhi from Mahatma, Volume 2.
For India, especially anyone in India who was located in its ancient tradition, life was sacred, and that means that all life was sacred. We may feel that as human beings we have evolved further than some species, but it should never mean to us that the life in another organism in itself is any less valuable or different in kind from the life in ourselves. So that was a very powerful element of Hinduism from times immemorial, was the belief that animals deserve to exist. And of course, there are times when you have to make choices and take the life of some animals because it would destroy much more advanced life, much more highly evolved life if you didn't do that. But by and large, to have that innate respect for the spark of life in every living creature, that was a glorious way to be, a glorious way to live, and the wellspring of nonviolent behavior.
And again, to speak from my own experience, I had the chance to spend some years apprenticing with a master of traditional Japanese carpentry. And there were several places where we broke ground, and because of the health of that soil that it was in, for instance, in a traditional Japanese garden, and we would take the time to remove the worms that we found, to make sure that we weren't damaging nearby life, to remove a nest if we had to take a branch away. We would try to be as respectful to everybody, the entire community in that space, which included the trees, the insects, the animals, not just the humans walking around. And by widening our sphere of consideration, it changed my entire experience of the garden. It stopped being about, oh, a human walks through here and looks like at this. Instead, I suddenly became aware of the flight pathways that the birds were taking, little highways among the treetops and the branches that you can only see when you're standing up at the top of a gate. Or the pathways underground, not just the pipes that humans were using, but the ones that insects were traveling through. And when you become aware of that, suddenly this sense of an expanding perception, again, that deep connection, that we're all in this together, we're all using and sharing in this space. It was home to a lot, not just the person that bought the house. And it does more than just expand your ideas about the space. It opens your heart and changes who you are.
I am not a visionary. I claim to be a practical idealist. Gandhi, Young India, August 21st, 1920.
This relatively early statement, but coming after 8 years of practice in South Africa, is well known and deservedly so. And again, it refers back to the Indian view that what we call religion, or various forms of worship of a deity, are completely scientific. They can be carried out experimentally as long as you know how to connect cause and effect, know how to connect your actions with their results. There's nothing unscientific about the practice of religion in that view. And both religion and science, to use those two categories, are attempts to actually not just know intellectually, but absorb reality.
And I feel like Gandhi's idea here of separating himself from the visionary title, which is he was constantly separating himself from people who called him a mystic or a great realized being. He would kind of shake his head and say, no, no, no. And what he was a very active, practical person, writing letters, walking around on the ground, talking to people. We have this image of the visionary as someone separated in the mountains, maybe sitting in a cave, seeing the world, traveling in their spirit body or something. And yet here was Gandhi on the ground, bare feet touching the earth, wearing the same clothes that they were, riding in the worst accommodations in a train, talking to people of all levels, especially through the various levels of caste system they had in India at the time, spending every day, dawn till dusk, connecting, making changes, learning new skills, listening and changing his mind, writing letter after article, talking to everybody in multiple languages. And this is the work of somebody who spends their whole life as a practical, pragmatic human. I need to do this thing. Somebody has to do it. Okay, I'll go walk over there and do it. And that's very different than this image of this distant visionary who's not of the people. He was first and foremost one of his family, one of the people of India. And he was just willing to be part of taking the steps, one of a huge part of this movement. And I feel like to try to elevate him to a different kind of person is almost doing him a disservice, rather than somebody who got up every day and did the work and did it harder and more than anybody else. That's more someone to hold up, and that's the person that I look at when I have a picture of Gandhi on the wall. I see that kind of work ethic and practical visionary.
Ahimsa means the eradication of the desire to injure or to kill. Gandhi, from the collected works of Mahatma Gandhi.
This is the literal definition of ahimsa. Ahimsa is based on a root, hun, in Sanskrit, which means to injure or kill. And so ahimsa really means the arousal of that force which comes into play when any desire to injure or kill is suppressed, is held aside, allowing the what we call love in action to come forth. So the important underlying belief here is that the core of our nature and of nature itself is positive. It's constructive. And what we need only do is take aside the obstructions, and that positive, constructive, unifying force will come forth.
This kind of statement echoes so much traditional statements of sages like the Buddha. And for instance, there's a number of what we might call awakening qualities, qualities of people who are becoming awakened. And for instance, one of them is to be honest. They do not tell lies or untruths. And in the beginning, people take it as, oh, I must really try hard to not lie. And that's certainly helpful. Please try hard to not lie. But part of what they're saying is you cultivate that part of you that is perfectly honest, that does not lie. There's an aspect of you to which lying does not even occur. It's not a part of its nature. And so what you're doing is you're uncovering that part of your Buddha nature. And one way you can identify is that you can say, oh, it doesn't lie. And similarly, there's a part of your awakening nature which does not wish to harm or kill. Like we said, not the insects or the small animals or all the creatures. But it's an awakening force inside you. It's part of your nature. And you disregard that part that is fine with killing, and instead find that aspect of your nature, nurture that part of your nature, which is very happy to never kill. And I feel like that's what it's pointing toward. It's not pointing toward a thing that you don't do, but rather you awaken inside yourself that quality within which you never would do that thing, in this case, to injure or to kill.
If national life becomes so perfect as to become self-regulated, no representation becomes necessary. Gandhi, Young India, July 2nd, 1931.
One of the very interesting and very useful things that I think I've learned from Indian tradition is how to use ideals. There's no question that we're not going to realize them in our life, but it's absolutely essential to hold them as the goal toward which we proceed. And that's exactly what Gandhi is doing here. Once we have set up a representational democracy in our country, for example, that's only the first step. The next step would have been the complete sophistication of the general public so that they would understand their political life much more perfectly. And at that later stage, representation would not be necessary. What's going on now is that representatives represent their own opinion, which represents one sector of the public. And there are all kinds of failures in democracy because of that.
This idea of, this is almost an anarchistic view of society, that if the society itself is well balanced, then it doesn't require regulation from the outside or representation because everything is already functioning. People work within their place, and of course Gandhi was really big on everyone carrying out the role that they have, whatever that role is, so that the whole can function together. And this idea that we can function together. For instance, if the public becomes very well educated, then they will know how to interact with their government in a way that is helpful. They don't need to be represented by people who are more educated than them because they already have the education. In the same way that perhaps a lawyer doesn't need to be represented by another lawyer because they are already educated in that. And so I think it's a really interesting concept that if you can elevate the populace, if you can help everybody become better versions of themselves, then the whole of society functions better, and we need fewer guardrails to protect them from their own ignorance or the damage that they can do on their own because of a lack of information.
Yetnya is not yetnya if one feels it to be burdensome or annoying. Gandhi from Yuravda Mandir.
The term yatnya means something that you offer up in sacrifice to a higher goal, based on a root yaj, which means that, to give, to offer. And what Gandhi is pointing out is that if you reluctantly hand over something, say, oh, well, go ahead, take it then if you insist, that is not a real yatnya. Elsewhere, he said, it's much more important to have heart without words than words without heart.
To me, this seems to be stressing then the importance of sacrifice. And I wonder about that quality of the thing that you give up with a whole and open heart, the thing that you sacrifice, the risk that you take with a whole and open heart. It doesn't feel burdensome, it feels like a worthwhile trade. And I wonder if this is what he's talking about, because we often will take risks or we'll often make sacrifices, again, where we feel burdened or annoyed. And perhaps this is what Gandhi is referencing, that rather than just doing things with an empty heart, oh, okay, I'll do this, I'll say this. Instead, we do whatever that is with a full heart, full commitment to whatever it is that we're doing in our life. I'm now doing this thing. And because of that, again, it has that power of the heart behind it. And the sacrifice is less empty. But I feel like this is one that is difficult for me to understand.
You may not waste a grain of rice or a scrap of paper, and similarly a minute of your time. It is not ours. It belongs to the nation, and we are trustees of it. Gandhi, Young India, March 19th, 1925.
If there's anything in Gandhi's philosophy, so to call it, even more central than nonviolence itself, it was trusteeship. Adopted as he understood it, trusteeship would eliminate the abuses of capitalism or any other exploitive system, because it would mean that I can use, for example, my computer, but I don't really own it. It means, for example, that I can use, say, this microphone that's in front of me or my computer, but not really own them, rather be in the relationship of a trustee, so that if someone else has a more legitimate claim on them, I would actually render them up. You know, if you can use this better than I can for the benefit of the nation, you go ahead and take it, not pounding the table and saying, this is mine, this is mine. So what that does is it enables me to use the resources that I have and that I acquire without attachment to them, which is a serious spiritual flaw. Well, of course, there's such a thing as possessions which are ill-gotten. You know, if I steal something from somebody else, I can't claim to be its trustee. At this point, I'm its thief. So this is mostly about our attachment to things and how we can use them without being possessed by them.
I feel like this is wonderful spiritual advice, as from any meditation teacher to a student, that there are a number of ways that the practice matters less than the way that you approach the practice, which is to say, internally, the context that you're holding, that you're creating while you do the practice, often is the practice, or is more important than the thing that you're doing, the technique that you're expressing. And so Gandhi here is making a really wonderful suggestion for those of us who are on the path of healing and awakening, to shift our perspective from the world, away from that's mine, that's yours, toward seeing our relationship with the world as whole and as one, and as also that stewardship, that being a trustee of objects, of spaces, of the people, parents who can see their kids not as possessions, and we all know those parents, versus the parents who see themselves as stewards, as caretakers of a whole person. The effect is completely different. The way that they work with that small child is very different. The same with the land. If we looked around at us and didn't try to use up the land like a possession, I have to squeeze every drop of money that I can out of this plot of land, rather than seeing the land as something that we are in stewardship of, we're caretakers of a life, and we want to heal it and pass it on, that relationship is completely different. So to me, this is very practical, direct spiritual advice like I might get from Master Jurchung or any other great teacher. And so I would highly recommend that everybody pause and take this very seriously in their lives. I know that I will.
The principal idea is to impart the whole education of the body and mind and the soul through the handicraft that is taught to the children. Gandhi, June 11th, 1938.
Gandhi was keenly interested in education and quite a revolutionary. His school of thought was known as Nai Talim, or New Education. And he recognized that for young children, if something doesn't take place in the body, they can't really relate to it very much. His abstract thoughts doesn't work for them. But he did feel that by working with them physically, bodily, you could do their whole education, moral and even spiritual. I don't know more to say about that. Maria Montessori had good conversations with Gandhi about this. And on the whole, it's an absolutely fascinating approach, which we would do very well to take a serious look at in our educational system.
I also first learned about this from students of the Montessori system, Waldorf school systems, places that take very seriously the framing within which kids are learning. I have several friends actually who run schools in different places in the United States and in Canada that educate the kids entirely outdoors. They take them out into the woods, they take them into a garden, and all of the schooling is taught, including mathematics and history, but all in the context of being outside and relating to nature and changing how they are. And of course, this only works for certain kinds of kids that flourish in that sort of situation. I don't know that I would have personally done very well in that situation. But for the kids that are there, they flower so beautifully in that situation because everything is not them sitting under fluorescent lights in a box room, maybe with no air conditioning, trying to take down these abstract ideas. But instead, everything is happening through their body, through their lived experience, integrated in the natural surroundings that they're shaped to be part of, and within a community. And it is a wonderfully healing experience for them.
There come to us moments in life when about some things we need no proof from without. A little voice within tells us, "You are on the right track. Move neither to your left nor right, but keep to the straight and narrow way. Gandhi, from the Leader, December 25th, 1916.
Again, a rather early statement from Gandhi in which he indicates once again that a person can develop inner awareness of right and wrong. And in order to do so, one has to be able to remain true to one's own perceptions, and that will work very well as long as one has a feedback mechanism. Is able to learn from mistakes, feed them back, and correct course. But if this were to be adopted, if each person were to act out his or her own conscience, no tyranny would be possible. There's a famous line from one of the old Upanishadic texts, the Chandogya Upanishad, which says, "Here," meaning in this world, "people do what they are told. Therefore they become dependent on others, and their works come to nothing in this world and in the next."
One of the statements that my own instructor will say from time to time, quoting one of his Sufi teachers, is, "No more second-hand word of God," which is a way of talking again about what Gandhi mentions in another quote, to develop the ability to listen to that still, small voice inside. These are all just different ways of talking about that same space of quiet wisdom inside us. We hear about people who commit atrocities and who are doing the wrong thing, and inside they have this sense of, maybe I shouldn't do this. Why am I doing this? Well, they told me to do this. I'm just following orders. And yet, if they had had the chance to pause, of course we're not always given that opportunity, but if they'd had the skill to learn to pause, to stop, even for 30 seconds, to let everything come to stillness, so they could, okay, is this what I want to be doing right now? And you know very well that, given the opportunity, many of them would walk away from the bad choices that they eventually would make. And so learning how to become still, to listen to that little voice within, as he's saying, we have a great insight into the directionality of our lives, how we want to live, not just following what we heard somebody else tell us to do, but rather moving toward the best aspect of our nature to create a world that is better and healthier for all of us.
The truth is that power resides in the people, and it is entrusted for the time being in those whom they may choose as their representatives. Gandhi, Mahatma, Volume 6.
Early nonviolence theorists used to talk about a French philosopher from the 18th century, I think, Etienne de la Boétie, who had exactly this view, which was revolutionary at the time, which is that rulers are trustees. They are entrusted with the power of decision-making by the people, but that ultimately the people have the power to withdraw that privilege, that representation. So because you become a representative or a ruler in some way, that doesn't give you the authority to stay that way and to use it as an opportunity to enhance and gratify your own will. You are there as a servant of the people.
And again, we return to this stewardship role, this trusteeship, that rather than doing something for your own sake, for your own gratification, I want this, I'll take that, look at me, I'm very important, that kind of narcissistic perspective on the world. Instead, we recognize ourselves as representatives, as stewards of an important space, as something much bigger than yourself. And we are a servant of the people. And there have been cultures where the highest level office, In the United States, maybe that would be the president. Whatever it is within that culture, that great chieftain, they are looked on as the lowest level servant. They are the servant to everybody. They don't have any servants. They're at the bottom of that rung, that ladder of hierarchy. And when you see yourself that way as the servant to all, gosh, what a difference that would make in the world. I can't even really picture it. And maybe that failure of imagination on the part of people like me is one of the reasons we have trouble creating that in our world. But if we can start finding people who represent us at the highest levels, who see themselves as servants, rather than hiring people who are the most ambitious, we usually seem to put people in power who are the most power hungry, and instead find people that don't crave that power. Instead, all they want to do is to be stewards and to represent and to serve the people. They would probably seem a lot less flashy, but gosh, what a difference that would make.
I do not love you because you agree to love me. I love you because I feel it's my duty to love you. Gandhi, Day to Day with Gandhi, Volume 4.
Well, I don't know whom Gandhi was referring to as an object of his love, and I suppose it doesn't matter. What he's really getting at is that if you have affection for another person or love for another person because they love you, that's not real love. And that's definitely not independence. Somehow, even to have intense love for another person is liberating. And this explains why that is true. Because it comes from within, it's freely given, and it's launched into the world, given as a gift to the other person or persons, without any necessary reciprocation. If there's reciprocation, it's not real love. It's a kind of contract.
And this again is a theme that we return to often within Gandhi's works. And I love that. It shows how constantly returning to the same point Gandhi was in all of his letters and all of his articles, making the same points over and over again. I appreciate that so much. Sticking to the message. And I'm not certain what he means by duty here. I assume that's a cultural reference that I'm not understanding. But I agree with Michael, as usual, that an expression of love is an expression that wells up from inside you, and it has nothing to do with what the other person is agreeing to or saying or giving me. If you are feeling like you love somebody because they look a certain way or behave a certain way towards you or say certain things, then, in my opinion, that's not what I would call love. It needs a different name. And other languages, of course, have those names. But instead, let's just call it small love and big love. There's unconditional love, which is real love. And that comes from inside you, and it heals you as much as it is a blessing to a relationship. And so if you find yourself swelling up inside with a wonderful feeling, unconditional love, it has nothing to do with how the other person acts or behaves, and it benefits and blesses you as much as it does everybody around you, that's definitely in the right direction.
The silent cry goes out daily to help me to remove these weaknesses and imperfections of mine. Gandhi, June 22nd, 1935.
Mahatma Gandhi was a humble man, and he needed to be because of the position in which he found himself. If it had gone to his head, everything could have gone wrong. And so he's constantly talking about, and in a very honest spirit, he's not just faking this, about his imperfections. And the silent cry that he talks about are probably specifically prayer sessions that they had just about every evening at the ashram or the community, the spiritual community that he established. He was painfully aware that he still had some inhibitions, some imperfections, and he would pray to what we can most conveniently call God to help him get rid of them and make him a more effective servant of the divine will for the benefit of all.
This shaping of his life around the willingness to look inside and to heal and to do better, and recognizing that he was in a position of huge power, more than a king, and he was the representative of the heart of an entire nation, and to recognize that he needed to constantly heal himself of whatever pride or whatever it is that might show up in those circumstances. I can only imagine how difficult it can be. The more power and resources that are thrust upon you, the more you have people who adore you, and the adulation that comes rolling in, but also the hatred and the slings and arrows of life that must have been aimed at Gandhi would be tremendous. And so for him to consistently write down his weakness, to share them openly, to talk about them, to heal them, and to reach out through his prayers to whatever power he thought was greater than himself, to heal those flaws and to recognize them as flaws and imperfections so that he could consistently grow as a human, not just for his own sake, but for the sake of all of the people around him. Because again, he saw himself as a trustee. This role of stewardship, the power that was placed in his hands didn't belong to him. So he had to be better because of that. And because of his constant internal work to become better, he certainly was.
We often make terrible mistakes by copying bad examples. Gandhi, Young India, February 16th, 1921.
This is not very controversial. It happens to all of us. Someone that has some kind of appeal or charisma or authority in our eyes can make a terrible mistake. We copy it. And that's why Gandhi insisted earlier that the only way to grow and be free is to act out one's own deepest convictions, always being ready to acknowledge that they may have been in error, that you find that in the experience, in the give and take of daily life. So while it is true that we often make terrible mistakes by imitating the example of other people, it's not equally true that we make terrible mistakes following our own conscience, because at least that's part of a long-term experimental growth process. But therefore, we can actually learn from our mistakes, where we can't really teach another person about theirs.
And I feel like that gift of having somebody to model yourself after is a huge benefit to our training and to our course in life. But also it does require a lot of discernment, because you can follow somebody who has hidden poisons that you also then imitate that behavior, those thought patterns. And so, of course, we're not all so blessed as to be able to be around somebody and model ourselves after somebody who's awakened or a high-level sage. If you have the chance, please do go find them and spend time with them. Shape your lives after them, because it saves us a lot of time. And yet, so many of us, by following the examples of our parents or of some terrible person who's in a position of power over us, in the United States, often it's an actor or a celebrity of some kind, In other places, it's royalty or musicians or people who claim spiritual powers. And we end up following them. And the worst of their behaviors and perspectives become ours, because so many of our ideas are embedded within who we think we are. So we join a group and we take on their ideals and their thoughts and feelings about things. We take on their prejudices, and we think we're doing it because we want to be better people. And then we end up damaging ourselves and the space around us. So this is a wonderful caution here from Gandhi, to take great care, to use great discernment when choosing someone to model yourself after. And if you find somebody that genuinely feels safe, high-level attainment, somebody you don't have to be afraid of, then simply by modeling yourself after them, it can be hugely beneficial to our lives.
If I had no sense of humor, I should long ago have committed suicide. Gandhi, Young India, August 18th, 1921.
We would call this today a pretty heavy statement, but it's also perfectly true. The Sanskrit idea of the creation of the world, nature of the world, is often called lila. It's a sort of sport, ultimately not to be taken in a totally serious spirit. If there were no humor in it, as Gandhi says, the suffering and the violence that people impose on one another, the alienation and separateness and hatred that they feel for one another would be overwhelming. We need a grain of humor, a grain of salt to realize that this is a kind of play. We have to take it absolutely seriously on our level, but we must not let ourselves be overcome by the sorrow of it.
Gosh, yeah, poor Gandhi. That world that he was embedded in, he put himself right in the thick parts of the greatest suffering. He followed around and attracted to him the worst forms of violence, and constantly stood there quietly, trying to heal it, trying to use himself as the medicine, to use his ideas and his grand heart as a way to heal the opened wound. So he was always in the place where there was the greatest suffering. And that must have been very hard on him. He often talked about being incredibly angry, and I had never heard this quote about committing suicide. But I certainly feel for him, that young Gandhi. And so let me just, as a side note here, for people who themselves are feeling these suicidal pains, these errant thoughts coming up, these little suicidal ideations that show up, please do reach out for help. There are lots of websites and phone numbers that you can reach out to. I'm not sure what country and which time you're watching this in, but there are always people who will help. In the very least, reach out to a friend. Just let them know what's going on. Have somebody who can lend a little bit of extra strength to your heart, and it will help. And I never want to pass by the chance to tell people that, because so many of us are suffering. Gandhi chose to experience that suffering and then walk right into the middle of it. And that's a very particular kind of person. We're not all like that. And so for you, if you are in a delicate space in your own life, my recommendation would be to step away from some of the worst violence and to put yourself into a safer space in order to actualize your own self-care, to be helped by other people. And then when you feel more stable and ready and healed, then take that healthy, open heart that you've got out into the world to help it heal as well. And so I'm just glad that Gandhi made it through that particular furnace because, gosh, what a huge heart he had.
I, for one, will not hesitate to give water or food to a soldier who comes to me with hands red with murder. Gandhi, Mahatma, Volume 6.
The context here was undoubtedly the impending Japanese invasion, and Gandhi was, of course, hard-pressed to say how India could defend itself and yet not violate its underlying principle of nonviolence. And what he did here was show the ability to distinguish between the person and the deed, that you can condemn the deed, you can do everything possible to prevent, say, a Japanese soldier from injuring anyone, but that never means that you fail to recognize the Japanese soldier as a person. On another occasion, he made the same argument. He said, I would not hesitate to give water to the thirsty one. But at the same time, he was ready to lay down his life to prevent them from dominating India.
This reminds me of a famous Buddhist and Taoist story that there was a young monk walking along the river, and he sees an older monk seemingly squatting by this side of the river, splashing his hands, sitting back, splashing his hands. So the young monk walked over to see what was going on. And what he saw is that a scorpion had fallen into the water and was drowning, about to be washed downstream. And to help protect and preserve its life, this older monk would reach in and lift the scorpion out of the water, and the scorpion would sting him, and he would drop it back into the water in pain. And then he would rush downstream a little bit, and again, dip his hands into the water, lift the scorpion out trying to save it, and the scorpion would inevitably sting him, and he'd drop it back in. And after watching this, of course, in the story, the monk preserved the scorpion's life, and the younger monk asked him, why did you do that? It kept stinging you, and yet you kept lifting it out. And the older monk looked at him with a smile and said, well, the scorpion was just following its own nature. It wasn't doing anything wrong. It was being a scorpion. He said, yeah, but why were you letting yourself be stung by trying to save its life? And the older monk smiled again and said, well, I was following my own nature. It is my nature to heal and to love, whatever the cost. And so it's kind of a funny story, but it creates this shape of recognizing that everything has its own nature. People who are injured and damaged and out of balance, often violence is what happens. It happens through them. It's also happening to them. And if we are the ones that are recognizing our own nature as humanity, we can see that injury. We can recognize our own grand heart and be loving no matter what the circumstances, including that soldier that walks up to us who is in the midst of that violence themselves. We see them as humans being injured as much by this thing that we're trying to heal. We're not angered at somebody who's sick and carrying the plague. It's not their fault they have the plague. They're suffering as much as anybody else. They may be walking around passing it around because they don't understand how plague works. But we're not angry at the person who has the plague. We help them heal because that's what we do as people who see the illness for what it is. And that's the way we all work together. We are constantly willing to dip our hands back into the water because that's our nature as healers.
A mere belief in ahimsa or the charka will not do. It should be intelligent and creative. Gandhi, July 21st, 1940.
The charka was the spinning wheel and was an absolutely critical part of Gandhi's whole program for the restoration of India. What he aimed for, again, was people should not simply take these things up mechanically because the Mahatma said so, or because my neighbors will approve of me, but to really think it through for oneself. And that means to have the courage to not do it if it seems wrong.
Yeah, to find that inner wellspring of that ahimsa, that open-heartedness, inside us, not following rules, because again, that turns us into mere automatons, soldiers. But true compassion comes from something that comes from inside us. It is not a process that we follow because we're checking off a list. That's certainly not a bad thing to do if you're not able to yet find compassion inside yourself. Find someone who can express that compassion, that great sage, or maybe follow Gandhi's example if he speaks to you. And follow the rules of your guru or your religion until you can find that quality in yourself that is healthy and healed. And then you don't follow rules anymore. And instead, you allow that open heart of compassion, this deep wellspring of love that comes up and wants to heal the world. That quality then guides you. And so what he's talking about here is ahimsa as something that is generated from the inside, not a simple lack of killing, but the desire to be somebody who doesn't want to kill and in fact wants to heal the world.
People who believe in the simple truths I have laid down can only propagate them by living them. Gandhi, Mahatma, Volume 4.
Mere intellectual assent to something is not very deep, it's not very powerful, it doesn't change much, either in yourself or in other people. What will change people is having thought through something on one's own. And that's what he's calling here, an intellectual assent, that you should never accept people's opinions just because they are their opinions, but to reason them out for oneself. A small number of people acting on a belief that they truly have thought through and made their own will be much more powerful than a large mass of followers.
This again is this theme of finding the deep qualities within ourselves to allow them to guide us, that still small voice, this deep well of ahimsa, that recognition of some truth from the inside out rather than just following it from the outside in. And again, that is not a bad thing. If you are unable to find this quality inside yourself, maybe you've been injured so much that when you look around, all you find is anger or hatred. You only see the darkness, but you recognize that that's not a healthy place to live, and so you need help to find a better way. That's when we follow the rules laid down by the people around us. And those are very important. I'm a really big fan of having those rules there for the people that are feeling blind, that are feeling lost, caught in their own anger, lost by their own desires and the damage they've experienced from their lives, because we're all victims of violence in one way or another. But then once that injury starts to be healed, once that infection begins to be cured, we become more and more able to be our truest selves, our best selves. And then we don't need these external rules because we can feel them from the inside. And I think that that's what Gandhi is talking about here.
I have not the shadow of a doubt that any man or woman can achieve what I have, if he or she would make the same effort and cultivate the same hope and faith. Gandhi, October 3rd, 1936.
That is a very big if, but once you accept it, it is really an inspiring testimony. And it's so like Gandhi not to claim that he is unique, separate from others, different, which is the claim of so many people who have achieved any kind of greatness. So it's really an extraordinary statement on both those counts, and one that stays with me quite often, and I'm sure it won't go out of your mind that easily either.
Gosh, it is this continual humbleness from Gandhi that I am so inspired by as a great leader. If you imagine him as the most powerful leader you've ever heard of in any country, greater than any fascist, greater than any president or king or queen, And yet, here he is wearing just a loincloth, this very homespun cloth around his body, doing the work, working in the dirt, working in the garden, talking with the people, dedicating his life to something different. And then when people say, wow, you're so amazing, he says, no, I'm just like you. Don't forget. And I find that so inspiring. And the continual contrast, because I've been immersing myself in these quotes recently, going through them, and the contrast to what I see in the world around me is so stark. And it is both heartbreaking and heart-opening. My heart is being broken open from the perspective of how I see the culture and the world around me because of this inspiring figure. And I'm very grateful to Michael Nagler to introducing me to his legacy.
Cow protection, to me, is one of the most wonderful phenomena in human evolution. Gandhi, January 1st, 1925.
There is a phrase in one of the Vedic hymns which goes, "Do not injure that innocent cow, Aditi." Aditi is actually a name for the sun, for nature. Gandhi saw in this principle not a superstition, not a fetish, but a model of compassion towards the innocent. And that's why it achieved that tremendous importance for him and would be for anyone who sees it in that exemplary way.
And to me, as somebody who cares a great deal about animal rights and protecting the other creatures, the other sentient beings on our planet other than just humans, I always find these statements about the willingness to protect the small creatures, the ones that are subject to our whims, with no laws, no common ethical standards of how to treat them, and yet we are willing to take care of them. And many people have said that how we treat the animals around us, how we treat the least of us, is going to then affect how we treat everybody else. Because if we can excuse the worst possible treatment from a creature that feels and loves just as much as we do, then it is a very small step to simply dehumanizing somebody else, calling them an animal, calling them less than human, which we see all the time. I literally saw it on the news today. Then that puts them into this category that we've already been well trained with. Oh, look, things that are less human, we can do anything we want to them. And we've already been brainwashed. We've been trained to see the world that way. And that is a slippery slope toward destruction. So to me, instead, changing around that we are caretakers again. How do we treat the least of us, the ones that need our protection the most, especially from ourselves? If we treat them the best, then how does that change how we treat each other? I find that to be inspiring and wonderful. And I really hope that that idea has an impact on your own life as well. And again, please, in the comment section, share your own experience of animal rights and animal protection, how you feel that it might relate to peace and nonviolence work. I know there's a lot of perspectives on this, and I'm always eager to learn. And I hope that you are doing something wonderful for yourself, and if you have the energy, for somebody else too.